Hi everyone, and welcome to my list of the top 10 games of 2020. Before we get started, I'll lay out my order. First is going to be my Honourable Mentions for the year, which will be listed in release order, and after which I'll be going into my actual top 10 list. The only games eligible for my top 10 are games which were released in the UK in 2020, and which I've finished. There are games in the Honourable Mentions that I know will top other people's lists, but I haven't finished them, so they aren't going in mine. Also, this isn't a list of technically good games, it's a list of what I enjoyed most. Now that that's out of the way, let's get started. Honourable Mentions. Warmth. This is cheap, not too difficult, and I just like the dogs. Black Mesa. Takes a classic and works to improve it in as many ways possible, well worth playing. Doom Eternal. If this was 2016 but with the movement of Eternal, this would be on the main list. As it is, it's got things I like and things I desperately hate. One Step from Eden. I didn't get very far in this because it was a bit too hard for me, to be honest, but I definitely liked what I played. Helltaker. This is a fun, simple puzzle game with a rough final boss if you suck at rhythm games, which I do, but this is mostly here for the fan art, to be honest. The Last of Us 2. I liked what I played, but I never felt the urge to go back and actually finish it. Maybe one day I will. Fall Guys. Being the first Battle Royale I'd played, I have a soft spot for it, plus I like the beans, but I've never won a game and probably never will. Super Mario Bros. 35. While I enjoyed this a lot more than I expected to, it's dead now. Nintendo make incredibly dumb decisions sometimes. Astro's Playroom. I very nearly had this on my list because it's just great. One of the best pack-in titles I've ever played. The only thing that lets it down is that there's not a whole lot after your first playthrough. Spider-Man Miles Morales. A more compact story than the original Spider-Man, but just as enjoyable throughout, plus you can swing around New York with a cat in your backpack. Number 10. Gemcraft Frostborn Wrath. Gemcraft Frostborn Wrath is the 5th game in the Gemcraft series, which in my opinion are the best tower defense games ever made. This game is the first in the series to exclusively get a paid release, with all prior games being released as free Flash versions, and justifies this by being one of the largest to date. With numerous new features, including larger, higher definition maps, new enemy types, faster gameplay, and a ton of quality of life upgrades, this entry builds upon the existing mechanics and tells its own story at the same time. With the death of Flash, it's currently difficult to play the other entries in the series, besides Chapter 2, so right now this is the best entry point for anyone interested. Frostborn Wrath is definitely another great entry in the series, and while I don't enjoy it quite as much as Labyrinth, it's easily up there. I still desperately miss Lime Gems, but they've been gone long enough now that I doubt they'll ever return. The game wasn't flawless at all, especially with its difficulty spikes, and some of the new enemy types being massively overpowered, but its inclusion of the quality of life upgrades and the new presentation style claws back any of the points that those issues would have cost it. While I would like it if the entire series got re-released on Steam, if that doesn't happen, at the very least I have this one to keep my love of the series going. Number 9. Animal Crossing New Horizons. Animal Crossing New Horizons is a life simulation game taking place on a desert island. You move in after taking the Getaway package from Nook Inc., and then are left to your own devices as you turn your own private island into an island paradise, complete with museums, shops, and 10 friendly neighbours. To do this, you'll need to visit other mystery islands to collect resources, villages, fruits, bugs, fish, and fossils, and then bring them home to craft tools and furniture or donate to the museum. Oh, and while you're doing this, you have to pay off the loans you took out from Tom Nook for your house. New Horizons is great, but has possibly too much to do. Collecting fruit, then collecting all the shells, then shaking every tree, then chopping every tree, then finding every fossil, then bashing every rock, then catching every bug, then catching every fish, then going to the other islands, not to mention having to replace your tools multiple times. It's a ridiculous amount of stuff to do each day. I quickly gave up on doing all of it, and started creating designated farm sections of my island. Even then I eventually stopped doing anything but collecting fossils and keeping the island tidy. But doing that has kept me coming back day after day for an entire year. There are also a number of things missing from the earlier games, like some fruits, gyroids, and then entire buildings like Brewster's Cafe. And at this point, it seems unlikely they'll get added in new patches like we all hoped early on. Besides that though, it's probably the best Animal Crossing game we've ever had, if not just for letting me see my boy Antonio in higher resolution. Number 8. Immortals Phoenix Rising. Immortals Phoenix Rising is a Ubisoft open world game, but for once not like you'd expect. Instead, this game takes a lot of inspiration from Breath of the Wild, and by inspiration I mean it's functionally the same game structure, but with some tweaks and a different coat of paint. Typhon escapes Tartarus and tears through Olympus, imprisoning the gods, or at least 4 of them, and removing their powers, dooming the world. After being shipwrecked on the Golden Isle, Phoenix begins hunting for their brother and crewmates, only to become embroiled within the war between Typhon and the gods. With the help of Hermes, they'll work to free the imprisoned gods, and they'll do this by clearing vaults of Tartarus to gain new skills, and then the Essence Vaults, sprawling dungeons which contain the power of the gods, before ultimately taking on Typhon himself. Immortals is kind of like a discount Breath of the Wild, but in some ways I actually much prefer it. For one, it has real dungeons, though they aren't the most interesting of things. The map is much more condensed than Hyrule is, so there's much less downtime while wandering the map, and the ancient Greek theme provides all manner of mythical creatures and fantastical powers to use throughout. The lead up to the final boss is much more linear and kind of boring compared to the rest of the game, but the actual climax is fun and interesting. I also wish they'd kept the old name. Gods and Monsters was much better. It's a solid game, one I'd even recommend, but it's not something I advise most people run out and get straight away. It's without doubt the best game Ubisoft released last year though. Number 7. XCOM Chimera Squad. XCOM Chimera Squad is a more casual, hero-focused take on the traditional strategic XCOM gameplay. Following the end of the war and the abandonment of the planet by the alien overlords, Chimera Squad tells the story of a planet trying to rebuild itself while also integrating the remnants of the alien invaders. You control the titular Chimera Squad, an elite police squad made up of various humans and aliens, the first of its kind. After Mayor Nightingale is assassinated, you are tasked with investigating the terrorist attack and bringing the perpetrators to justice by taking down the various criminal gangs of City 31. To do this, you'll need to take advantage of all of the skills available to you from the various team members, as well as making proper usage of the new breach system to clear rooms as efficiently as possible. This would be a lot easier if the game wasn't utterly broken at times. It's a shame too, because I actually really enjoyed it, enough to make it this high on my list despite its issues. If it was less broken, maybe I'd have put it higher on this list, but at this point it doesn't seem like they're really going to do much to fix it. I didn't have a single play session without some form of bug, most commonly animation issues, but including freezes and all manner of other things. While I'm complaining, one other issue is that for some reason it takes forever to load, like multiple minutes from pressing play in the launcher to actually getting into the game. That being said though, I very much enjoyed it, enough for it to be the first XCOM game that I actually finished. It's a lot more forgiving than any other game in the series, enough that I wasn't utterly devastated when things went wrong, but it's also generally a lot easier to get yourself out of sticky situations using each character's new skills. All in all, I think this is a great way to get into the genre, but perhaps not the best entry in the XCOM series, though honestly that is the exact reason I like it so much. Number 6. Final Fantasy VII Remake. Final Fantasy VII Remake is not a full remake of Final Fantasy VII, nor is it even really a remake at all, taking significant deviations from the first few hours of the original game, and spinning an entire 40-hour campaign from it. Taking place entirely within Midgar, Remake follows Cloud's journey from his first mission with Avalanche to escaping the city. Along the way, you'll revisit the familiar sections from the original, as well as explore new areas with new stories, new characters, and even new boss fights. The changes made throughout prevent this from being a replacement for the original, and give the game its own identity while still paying homage to a classic. There's also soon to be a new PS5 exclusive DLC for the game, adding even more new story to an already massive package. I've spoken as much as I can about the differences between this and the original because I haven't actually ever played Final Fantasy VII. What I can definitely say though is that I thoroughly enjoyed playing this, and for various reasons early in the year I was considering it as my game of the year. At least one of those reasons was Jessie. That being said, the game isn't perfect by any means. The lip sync is particularly bad, with some of the other animations feeling stiff too. Some areas are kind of barren and incredibly linear, some of which you'll have to visit multiple times throughout your playthrough. The biggest issue though is that it very much feels like a tutorial for a bigger game, which to be fair it kind of is. It spent an awfully long time teaching you about aspects of its gameplay, with tutorials being displayed even into the final few hours. I desperately hope that the following games don't give so many, but I doubt it. I also hope that you'll get to carry over at least some of your progress, or the weapons, or at least something, because otherwise it's going to get very tiring leveling up the same way every time for whoever knows how many more games till this remake series is finished. Honestly though, I just can't wait to find out. Number 5. Ghost of Tsushima. Ghost of Tsushima is an open-world action-adventure game set in the Isle of Tsushima during the Mongol invasion. It opens with the eradication of almost all samurai upon the Mongols' first landing, with Jin being one of the only survivors. After being rescued by a thief and dragged to a nearby village, Jin sets off on a journey to save his uncle and drive back the Mongol horde. To do this, you'll need help from the inhabitants of the island, such as Yuna, the aforementioned thief, her brother Taka, a talented blacksmith, Ishikawa, a master archer, and Masako Adachi, matriarch of a slaughtered clan. You'll destroy Mongol encampments and free enslaved peoples while forging alliances and building your skills as a samurai and a ghost, all in an effort to reclaim the island of Tsushima. Ghost of Tsushima is a great send-off to the PS4 and is arguably one of its best games. While it takes inspiration from games like Assassin's Creed, it has its own clear and distinct identity, deeply tied to Japanese history and mythology. It's also a truly beautiful game, particularly the title sequence while riding your horse through the grass. It does have some annoyances though, minor as they are. The game has some odd pacing, not in its story, but in its upgrade system, in that by the end of Act 1, I had not only completed the vast majority of my upgrades, but also collected almost all of the skills I wanted. During combat, there's no lock-on, which is understandable, but it makes it very easy to lose track of enemies behind walls or out of frame, leaving yourself open to attack. My final annoyance was that pickups are often placed very close to interactable objects, especially doors, meaning you'll frequently leave a building rather than pick up the item on the floor. These are all pretty minor issues though, especially over the course of a 40-hour game, and do nothing to temper the rest of the game's brilliance. Number 4. Resident Evil 3 Remake. Resident Evil 3 Remake is the second remake of a Resident Evil game in 2 years, and follows Jill Valentine as she tries to escape from Raccoon City during the zombie outbreak. During the game, you'll be pursued by Nemesis, an indestructible tyrant, while traversing various areas, solving puzzles, and fighting the zombified inhabitants of the city. In some situations, you'll also control Carlos, as he tries to track down the only person who has the cure to the virus. The game takes place before, during, and after the events of Resident Evil 2. It's hard to talk about Resident Evil 3 without making comparisons to Resident Evil 2, so let's get that out of the way first. I think Resident Evil 2 Remake is a better game, but I enjoyed Resident Evil 3 Remake more. It's the first game in a long time where I've actually wanted to play it again as soon as I finished it, and if I didn't have as much to do, I would have. The game clearly de-emphasised both the survival and the horror aspects of RE2, and puts much more emphasis on the action, and it's a much easier game for it. By the end of the game I was drowning in ammo, materials and health items, but honestly I kinda liked that. As for complaints, I only really had one or two. I had a weird bug while I was playing, where textures on certain items, chairs, cars, things like that, would flicker if my frame rate was unlocked at above 60 FPS. It took me a long time to work out what the issue was and fix it, and it was quite distracting, but it didn't stop me from playing at all. Also, the introduction for the Palehead enemies takes place incredibly late into the game, well past the point where you've actually started fighting them, literally moments before you kill the last one in the game. Overall though, these are very small issues for me, and I think Resident Evil 3 Remake was great. For me, it was well worth the price, though I can understand why others felt differently. Number 3. Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity is another Zelda-themed Musou, the follow-up to the original Hyrule Warriors, but this time it's a prequel of sorts to a mainline Zelda game. Taking place 100 years before the events of Breath of the Wild, Age of Calamity tells the story of Hyrule's fall to Calamity Ganon, at least it does for the most part. You'll control a variety of characters including Link, Zelda, Impa, Urbosa, Rivali, Daruk and Mipha, each with their own unique combat styles, weapons and skills. The game is also surprisingly story and character heavy, and explores the lore of Breath of the Wild deeply while providing fun gameplay throughout. Age of Calamity is the best Zelda game on the Switch. As far as I'm concerned, it's not even close. It tells an engaging story with interesting characters, and does it with its own gameplay style separate from the normal entries in the series. This is, in my opinion, what Breath of the Wild should have been, and if you want to hear more about that, you can listen to episode 8 of my podcast, which is all about that. Compared to the original Hyrule Warriors though, it's a tad lacking. The lack of a free play mode is probably the most damning, meaning you can't use any character on any map. You're stuck using specific characters when necessary. The map itself is also kind of unwieldy, especially when you're deep in the game with hundreds of interactable points on screen. I get what it was going for, but it's a lot more cumbersome than it is cool. There's also no reason to play on the higher difficulties. In the original Hyrule Warriors, certain things were only available at higher difficulties, but that isn't the case here, and it's kind of a shame. Finally, without getting into spoilers, there's something that happens which stops the game from being a canon prequel, and while I think it allows the story to go in a cool direction, I'd actually have liked the game more if it had ended in the appropriate way. Honestly though, this is still one of my favourite games of last year, and definitely one of the best games on the Switch. Number 2. The Pathless. The Pathless is an immense action-adventure game in which you play the Hunter, a master archer seeking a way to free the world from the Godslayer's curse. She is accompanied by an eagle, the reincarnation of the Mother of the Tall Ones, walking gods who have been enslaved by the Godslayer to control the island. To free them, she must solve puzzles to bring the light back to the accursed area, weakening the Godslayer's hold over each Tall One until she can permanently free them. She does this through the use of her bow, shooting talismans strewn across the island to quickly move from tower to tower before engaging in an epic chase across the land, a running battle with that area's god. With each one freed, she gains more power to help in her ultimate battle with the Godslayer. This came incredibly close to being my game of the year, and in the Discord survey I run I did actually put it as that, but it's ended up in second place here. Giant Squid's previous game, Abzu, was beautiful and euphonious, and The Pathless is both of those things but on a whole other level. The striking aesthetic was one of the first things that drew me to the game, and the orchestral soundtrack gives great depth to the boss fights. Speaking of, the boss fights are an intense multi-stage spectacle, from the chase across the land to the fights in the dedicated boss arenas, and are the best examples for why the music and visual presentation is the best of the year. It's only a small amount of the game though. Most of the time you'll be using your bow to run across vast distances through forests and across plains as you gain the emblems you need to free the Tall Ones from their enslavement to the Godslayer. This involves finding and completing various puzzles throughout the world, which for me struck the perfect balance between difficulty and intuitiveness. Good puzzle design should be entirely in the understanding, and not in the performance, and The Pathless is practically flawless in this regard. Finally, there's my favourite part in the game, the bird. The Pathless is the latest entry in the game of main character with bird, and that is probably the best bird we've had so far. The bird is the reincarnation of the mother of the Tall Ones, but is mostly just an adorable and helpful friend. If you walk, they hop alongside you, you can use them to glide and fly around the area, and if they get injured, you can gently stroke them back to health. Honestly, the game would have been one of my favourites just for the bird, but the rest of the game is so good that it just tops it off. Any other year, this would have been number 1. Number 1. Cyberpunk 2077. Cyberpunk 2077 is a sprawling open-world action RPG in which you play V, a low-level merc looking to work their way to being a legend of Night City. V's big break comes from Dexter Deshawn, one of the city's top fixers, when he offers a job to steal a biochip from Yorinobu Arasaka. A job which, predictably, goes terribly wrong and results in Deshawn betraying and executing V. V survives, but is beset by visions of long-dead rocker and terrorist Johnny Silverhand, who works with V to find out exactly what the biochip is, why Johnny's inside their head, and how to get them out. You can choose to start in a variety of ways, from Corpo, a lifelong Arasaka employee who understands the inner workings of the corporate world, to Nomad, an exiled member of the Snake Nation, or my personal choice of Street Kid, a child of the criminal underworld of Night City. Each of these will go on to inform the choices you can make throughout your journey, though not nearly as much as you'd like them to. More importantly though are the choices you make in each mission. Do you go in guns blazing, try to talk your way through, or maybe silently sneak in and out without anyone ever seeing you there? No matter what though, you'll need a variety of skills to help you get to your goal. I'm sure if people cared about my opinions this would be very controversial, but this is a list of the games I enjoyed most from 2020, and without doubt I enjoyed Cyberpunk the most, and for the longest amount of time. After 90 hours and hundreds of missions, I can without doubt say this was my favourite game of the year, despite its many flaws. It really needed another few months of work, especially on consoles, but even this was a hell of a lot better than many of the games we got last year. I definitely had fun, but more than that I found the entire game rather relaxing, to be honest. Driving from mission to mission, hacking everyone to death and then strolling in to collect the loot was rather zen for me, a great way to relax after working each day. Outside of that, the story was good, with some great moments throughout, and I really liked a lot of the characters you interact with, particularly Panam and Judy. It does seem like it was everything else that fell by the wayside in development, but I still consider this my favourite game of 2020. So, do you agree? If you don't, let me know what you consider your favourite games of 2020 in the comments below. I had this brilliant plan last year that I'd write a section of this video every time I finished a game, and that way I'd be all done before the year was over. Not only did I not do that, I didn't even finish all the games I wanted to until February this year. Besides that, I honestly don't think last year was very good for games. While there are some very good games, there were a whole lot of average to trash games as well. Outside of picking my clear favourites, I had an incredibly hard time choosing, especially with the honourable mentions. Anyway, thanks for watching, I'll see you later. Bye. Special thanks to my patrons Heaven Over Hell, Justin Wood, Hobbs, Koopy Vegeta, Gunrunner and Water.